So normal. New charts, 31st May data point, a novel perspective. These charts, previewed in the chart update, complement our standard charts. They are simpler but also important for one very significant reason. Note to censors, we use only government data. If you have a problem with the results, speak to the government. Having previewed a couple of these, UK and Sweden, in the regular chart update, I couldn't help but be tempted to integrate them into the all-country spreadsheet. The results are little short of astounding. To really get how important this is, let me give you a simple task. The UK peaked on 13th of April with 5,807 cases, reported for a total of 71,874 cases. Now draw me a chart of the UK cases to that point. Could you do that? Would you even try? I wouldn't. Given what I know, I could get Excel to do some drawing for me, but that's so little information to go on, how can anyone be expected to make a decent job of it? Yet with one little piece of additional information, that's enough to give us this. Okay, smarty pants, sure, it's enough to give us the solid blue lines, the normal distributions for cases, but up to peak, are they a good fit or what? All because of two things. The mean, standard deviation and scaling factor are enough to define that distribution uniquely, and B, most importantly, the virus, as we'll see shortly, and as we've seen before, is normal. Call it logistic, log normal, whatever, they're all closely related. But time and again, we see that the virus behaves normally, literally consistent with a normal distribution. So when it doesn't, or more accurately, when its reported figures don't, then it becomes even more compelling to ask how come a simple biomachine that is universally normal is now abnormal. The UK government had no problem with a normal virus up to peak, but it has a big problem with a normal virus coming down off peak. And take a look at the right-hand panel. I'll go full screen and see the real bonus for this work. 21,750 extra deaths, 138% increase. More than double. Original plus 138% equals 238%. What we should have got away with, even allowing the original deaths were legitimate. Over double thanks to fake deaths, because that's what this comes down to. And look at those growth curves on the left, veering off normal to go flat instead of coming down. And gosh, so much for lockdown. Cases and deaths growth was already falling and did not deviate from the curve except to go up, staying level when the curve headed down. Big fail for lockdown, big win for the agenda. And so we got the false flag waving in the breeze. And when we should have been done with the virus, it just kept going. Ironically, it lets Sweden off the hook, mostly because the formula works off the highest case day, and that happened after the first major contagion. Notice how the crazy spikes happened before peak and consistent with the earlier peak, as shown in our chart update. Here is the cases chart we showed for Sweden, with the cases taking off sideways. That ain't normal. Am I going to lose sleep over Sweden getting off easy? No, because we're getting so much for free in these charts, I'm delighted, almost overwhelmed. Firstly, every chart that looks normal out of our 50 or 214 is another nail in the coffin for people who want to excuse abnormal behavior. The virus doesn't do abnormal, it's normal. Second, even though I understand it, it blows me away that I don't even have to do any work. Just let Excel find the highest peak value and fit to that, and hey presto, like magic, a proper chart up to peak at least. All those people selling us BS, and I got another one today, and this thing is normal, standard, regular, and still people are trying to sell us lockdown despite the facts. This character, Martin Armstrong from Statista.com, has probably earned himself a video for trying to show Sweden as the world's biggest fail for no lockdown. His numbers are probably accurate, but lies, damned lies and statistics. And gee, who's next on his list? But first, what's his fail? He fails to mention that Belgium, not Sweden, is the world's hardest hit country, and that Sweden is in the number 6 slot behind hardcore EU-UK countries, Belgium, Spain, UK, Italy, France, and just ahead of more hardcore EU and the USA, Netherlands, Ireland, USA and Switzerland. It's yet another puff piece or knife in the back piece, and I have no time for people who are either ignorant or malicious, so it might be video time for him. Meantime, let's do a scan of our 50 and see what they look like with these charts. Here's Italy, our original and standard European benchmark. It has good fits for growth decay until, guess what, the agenda kicks in, and despite Italian lockdown or whatever, growth goes up relative to the decay it should have experienced. I did have sympathy for Italy, but it seems it's a loyal servant of the EU after all. Here's the EU flags waving. Here's the cases and deaths saying, sorry, no interest in flat, thank you, and no doubt some muppet would actually call this flattening the curve. And here's the price Italy paid, an extra 11,563 deaths nominally over its natural, normally defined, Covid-19 experience, a 44% hike in cases, 54% in deaths. This doesn't replace our standard chart, which has a lot more detailed information. In fact, I've added the normal distributions and growth decay to the bottom left. And the extra cases and deaths in both actual and normalized population figures, and the percentage extra over the natural, normal cases and deaths figures. There is a lot of information on that one slide, more than enough to send people to jail if we could get a court to listen. But for now, if you appreciate it, I'm glad. Running through these, the main thing is to appreciate the gee, it's normal effect and see how often the simple rule generates a reasonable fit for the cases to peak. And it may flag up some egregious behaviour. I'm not fussed about a few extra deaths, even if that sounds bad, or 10% extra mortality. This is a big and essentially automatic fraud detector, and all it takes is the human eyeball. Works for me. So Algeria, even though barely at peak, it comes up with nice curves and shows a wayward tail for deaths. I don't think that's criminal, merely unfortunate. South Africa, again, it's treating the last as peak, as SA is climbing, and you'll note we're using linear scales as for daily cases and growth that's natural, and we're not trying to spot curl over on the cumulative chart. Basically, strictly, we should ignore climbing charts which haven't got a properly defined mean or peak, but it still doesn't look silly. Zambia, a tight peaked curve that looks fine, and what for deaths? Nice place to live, I guess. Maybe send some of our politicians there, teach them about non-crisis crises. Off to the Americas and Barbados, a rather fuzzy bunch of cases and a blank deaths chart. Guess that was one crisis you missed. Lucky Barbados. Brazil, again climbing hard, so not proper to model based on peak, but still it doesn't do a bad job. Also note the growth decay, a bit flat in cases, but distinct and appropriate for deaths. Canada, a bit like Sweden, that spike at the top gets Canada off the hook I suspect, though its deaths look quite good. Keep an eye on those growth decay lines. Ecuador, very messy data, so shouldn't hope for too much, indeed safer to simply scrub this and work with a standard chart. Mexico, good growth decay lines, climbing but a reasonable fit all the same. Won't read anything into it until it peaks properly. USA, oh gee, flag waving at the top. Seems appropriate somehow, plus of course being a power centre and all. Deaths curve thrown out by the spike. Austria, here's a rare case of a legitimate chart where growth rate actually decays properly below 1 and you get a completed curve as you should. Belgium, they grace themselves with completed curves, but notice how the deaths is fat compared to the normal, with a 78% excess deaths. EU HQ, interesting. Croatia, completed curves, not much drama, fine by us. Denmark, interesting, a bit like Belgium, rapid rise and yet the fall gets delayed. Look at that horizontal path on the growth decay charts, and 101% extra deaths. Sneaky, huh? Finland, a completed deaths curve, not material, not the tidiest of data, but at those levels not a big issue. France, again like Belgium, completed curves but going sideways on the growth decay charts, and 73% extra deaths. Germany, like Austria, a rare case of a completed, pretty much. Good growth decay curves, complete compliance, fractional fat tail, but at 11% not material. Greece, a bit fussy on the data, but great finished curves and good growth decay compliance. An extra 41 deaths, huh? Yup, not a material factor. Hungary, a bit distorted with that spike on cases, a good deaths fit which then gets a bit distorted after. A bit messy overall, but interesting. Iceland, nice fit in cases, no deaths to speak of, nice to have that level of non-problem. Ireland, two good completed curves, did have that massive death spike, going sideways a bit now, but from low levels. On this chart it seems reasonable. Italy already covered, but here in company. Yep, nice waving all the way down for a 54% deaths bonus. Real? Who knows? Reason to investigate. Malta, so-so chart, got a couple of outbreaks rather than one amorphous one, no deaths to speak of. Lucky them. Netherlands, oh dear, a familiar picture. Almost completed curves, but horizontal growth decay at peak when it should be dropping, and 121% excess deaths. You've served the EU well. Norway, good curves, a bit choppy on data, something like proper growth decay, but with too few deaths to show clearly, which is rather good news. Poland, caught out by that second peak in cases, a bit sideways in growth decay, but showing some proper decay in deaths. Choppy, but not alarming. Portugal, pretty good curves, though stalled towards the bottom. Did get good decay going, but now sideways. Belated allegiance to the agenda, or natural? Russia, climbing, so not a true peak. Growth rate decaying, so that's natural and good. Where next? Spain, close to complete on both, which is good. Those horizontals look dodgy, but at very low levels. They're inevitable. Swollen on the way down, 59% extra deaths, a bit dodgy. Sweden, we've seen the selected peak rather disguise the choppy sideways in cases and the slow descent in deaths. Pronounced sideways on decay, they get away with it on auto. Switzerland, well-defined curves completed but a bit choppy in data. Descent did not match the climb, so 77% extra deaths. Real or dodgy? Turkey, distinctly out to the side on both cases and deaths, with matching sideways on growth decay. Not a massive hit in extra deaths, might put that down to local events, not agenda. UK was seen and gets the Prix de Concours for dodgiest chart. No agenda there then. Australia, two completed curves, a bit of chop at the bottom of deaths, sideways cases inevitable at bottom, so not an issue. Extra deaths 19, yeah, not going to lose sleep over that. China, which is really Hubei and is already shown to be two perfectly normals. The spike, presumably a data correction, misleads the auto-select, and the most useful thing here is illustrating that. Here's our original Hubei cases and deaths curves, which were the first to use the fixed, determined by peak method. Climbing, so not really a peak chart. and cases look like two distinct outbreaks. Nothing much to say here, other than it's Indonesia. Japan, a bit messy, excessive cases, maybe testing. Deaths sloppy and sideways on way down, but 315 extra deaths, not going to lose sleep over that either. Korea, the one that was over before everyone else was begun. The reason we should never have gone into lockdown. They didn't. Textbook. Malaysia, interrupted drop on cases but completed drop on deaths. Testing, extra deaths 31. Alert the media, or maybe not. New Zealand, how tidy and minimalist. And 13 extra deaths, shocker. UK media didn't pick up on this, double shocker. Philippines, again a spike misleads the auto-peak in cases, looks like a second outbreak, no not second wave, just an outbreak. 489 extra deaths, we should be so lucky. Singapore, if that was the UK, we'd be calling foul, but with no deaths to speak of, 4 extra, pass. Thailand, did nobody notice the Far East at all in the Western media? Apparently not. That really is a quickie all over, so sorry, thank you, bye. Vietnam, tidy and minuscule cases, 0 deaths. They cancelled the one they had. Seriously. India, late to the engagement, still climbing, but growth decay normal in both cases, so fine. Iran, first outbreak done, a second outbreak complicated things. It is allowed to happen. Good decay and not a concern. Iraq, another one with a completed outbreak and then experienced another one. In fact, close examination of most curves shows multiple mini outbreaks, which is rational. Not an issue here. Israel, 2 tidy curves humps with proper decay, extra deaths 8. Yep, we'd call that textbook. Pakistan still climbing but with normal decay for growth, so fine, normal. UAE, so sporadic it rather confuses our growth decay charts. You have to have 5 non-zero in a row to get 1 data point, 2 data points to show up on the chart. 21 extra deaths, yep, not an issue. That's it. I hope the main thing you've got from this is just how normal the charts were. If they weren't climbing, as yet unpeaked normal, generally fitted well, as is perfectly reasonable since every model and infographic, including Ferguson's Imperial College Report 9, shows a normal-like chart. Formally, they might be logistic, an approved epidemic model, but it's the same thing with slimmer ankles, tails. No, it's just a shame that epidemiologists were lazy with their language and that they gave the agenda propagandists such an easy win. We won't need to do this style of presentation very often, if at all. We've embedded the key normals and the extra calculations in the standard charts. We may do an occasional tour or review and yet no sound, particularly a world tour so that all 214 countries get a look in. That's it for now. I'm Andrew Mather, a 60-year-old Brit, mathematician, financier, technologist, husband, biker, pilot, healer, whatever. Feel free to get in touch, andrew@peerlessreads.com or andrew@amather.com. Either should get to me.